Hi, I'm Ted Haptegaber, founder and producer of Live Talks Los Angeles. Thanks for joining us. Since we started over a decade ago, we have brought you hundreds of conversations with storytellers, writers, actors, musicians, humorists, chefs, and thought leaders in business and science. You can watch and hear most of these in our YouTube channel and our podcast. For details, visit livetalksla.org. And now, here's the show you've tuned in to see.
So, welcome back to Los Angeles.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be home.
I was thinking, I think the first time I met you was 18 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
I know, in 2004.
Yes.
When I came back from my second tour of duty
Right.
at ABT.
Yes, second tour of duty. I love that.
And you would have been in the Corps de Ballet
Yes,
then?
I was in the Corps de Ballet because I joined the main company in 2001.
Oh my God, time flies.
Yes.
So it's so we're so happy to have you here, and I have to say it's been such a wonderful thing to watch you on your journey, which has been extraordinary.
Thank you.
Just so wonderful. So before we get started on the sort of book stuff, meat stuff, I want to say congratulations on your baby.
Thank you so
Jackson.
much.
So how old is he?
He's 6 months now.
Wow.
I never imagined that it would be as incredible as it is, and I can't wait to get back on the stage with this new perspective on life, and it's just really fulfilling right now, though, to be enjoying all of him and trying not to do much else.
So, I mean, as a dancer, having a child, you know, it's like completely discombobulating for your body, right?
Yes.
And so have you felt like you're starting to get back into the swing of things, even though you're not in class yet?
Right. So, you know what's so fascinating is, you know, throughout the pandemic, I wasn't really dancing. I had a back injury going into it, and then I was pregnant. So it's been almost 3 years since I've been on a stage performing, which is the longest I've ever gone and since I've started dancing.
Yeah.
When I was pregnant and this may be too much information, when I went into labor, I felt so prepared.
Oh, interesting.
And I felt like, oh my God, this is such a familiar feeling. It felt as if I had been rehearsing for 9 months.
Oh my gosh.
And it was the day of the show, and you know, the mental and emotional like stamina, those things that just kick in and prepare you to go out there. I just felt like being a ballerina for 25 years has prepared me for this moment, and it was an incredible thing. But now I think really organically, I've just allowed for my body to heal and come back to whatever state it's going to, whatever form it's going to take, and I feel really good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm so happy. So I think it would be helpful if we started with like a quick Misty journey.
Okay.
So sort of setting the stage, as it
Yeah.
were. So how did you find ballet or ballet find you?
Mm-hmm. Ballet definitely found me. My mom loves to tell this story that at 3 years old, I was obsessed with this tutu on Halloween, and she had to hide it from me because it was dirty and I was growing out of it. But other than that, I don't recall ever having heard classical music or seeing ballet. It wasn't something that was even on my radar. But my mother was a professional cheerleader for the Kansas City Chiefs football team. And dance was a part of our household. She would choreograph dance numbers, and we would perform in talent shows and things like that, me and my 5 siblings. But it wasn't until I was in middle school that I found the dance team there, the drill team, and I auditioned for captain. I had no experience. I ended up getting the position. And from there, the the coach on the drill team suggested I take a ballet class at the Boys and Girls Club. So I was really pushed into taking this class because the teacher thought I had a lot of physical, natural potential. And it was my first ballet teacher, Cynthia Bradley, who was offering free classes at the Boys and Girls Club, who literally pulled me onto the basketball court where this class was being offered, and made me take the class. And I'm so glad she did. It was terrifying for me, just being an introverted child and finally finding comfort in this drill team and performing to pop music and things that were familiar to me.
Right.
But it was so scary to do something that was so far from my comfort zone, like ballet. But I immediately fell in love with it. And I ended up training for 4 years before I joined ABT Studio Company.
Which is absolutely remarkable. You know, there's, having sort of run ballet schools and whatever, you can definitely see when kids have the natural movers that are naturally coordinated, that seem to, and ballet is not a natural vocabulary, which is sort of like the difficult transition, but I always found that the studio was a place of sanctity. You know?
100%. That's exactly how I felt. And I think because of my upbringing, you know, there was a lot of chaos, a lot of moving, not a lot of stability. And there was something so sacred about being in that space that my body could relax. I felt like I was so tense all the time. And I feel like maybe people don't connect ballet with like being calm and relaxed. But that's exactly how I felt. It was this space where you know, I felt it's really the opposite of how people kind of identify with ballet, but I felt no judgment. I felt safe. I felt like I was a part of a community for the first time.
Do you remember the first ballet you saw?
The first ballet I saw live was American Ballet Theatre.
Oh, woohoo.
It was Don Quixote.
Oh, great.
It was Paloma Herrera as a young principal dancer, and Angel Correa was still a soloist, and it was at the Music Center.
Wow. Well, that's a dynamic duo for sure.
I mean, once I saw that live, I was sold. I mean, it was like, it was ABT or nothing. I was going to be Kitri one day, and Paloma was going to be my best friend.
And lo and behold. So, you know, at the Music Center, we are so proud and, you know, are delighted by the fact that you were part of Spotlight. And you know, this is our program for young artists where we provide scholarship and training and some wonderful performance opportunities. Was it a good experience for you? Did it impact you?
The Music Center has been such a big part of my development and growth as an artist, as a dancer. And that was how it all started with the Spotlight Awards. It was the most incredible experience. Being able to build these friendships and relationships with all of the semifinalists, being around my peers that were, you know, had the same goals, and, you know, supporting one another, and then getting to that final stage of being a finalist. It was just, again, it was such a supportive environment. I remember just being backstage and the young girl that I was competing with being on the sidelines, cheering me on. I stayed and you know, the same experience, but and then being exposed to, you know, having Rebecca Wright was one of the judges.
Incredible.
Who was running the head of the summer intensive, I believe, at the time. And she's someone that I idolized and watched VHS tapes growing up.
Oh, she was a beautiful dancer.
Beautiful dancer with the company. And Gerald Arpino was also, of Joffrey Ballet, was one of the judges. And so the opportunity to be seen in that way by these two, you know, really impactful people, like in the classical ballet world, it gave my career like an incredible head start that a lot of dancers don't get to experience, you know, being seen in that light on a stage at 15 years old. And that was kind of the start of my journey with ABT, was being seen by Rebecca, being offered, you know, a scholarship to come to the summer intensive, and it all took off from there.
Well, you know, the external validation, I think, is also really helpful when you have somebody who doesn't have any personal connection saying, you know, you have a future. That's
Right.
incredibly,
Yes.
it provides you some confidence that
Yes.
maybe you can do this crazy thing after all. So you moved to New York and you joined the ABT Studio Company, which is the second company to the, and then a year later you joined the main company. And you know, it's a huge transition from being a student to being a professional.
Oh, yeah.
You know, a student, there are pressures on you, but it's all about your development. When you're working in a company, you have a job to do. You're doing 8 shows a week. You have, so for me that was really pretty overwhelming and terrifying.
Yeah.
Was it for you?
I remember just being so excited. I think that I'd always craved being a part of something bigger than me. And this word community that I keep coming back to, and kind of sense of family, that since I was little, I've craved being a part of this kind of stable family environment. I don't know if you could call ABT a stable family environment, but it was consistent. It was there for me every day. And so I feel like I fell into that pretty organically and easily. So I don't know that I was completely overwhelmed. I was more excited to just like dive in head first. All of the challenges I accepted and was ready to take on. I think it was more exciting than anything. I remember the touring being more of a challenge for me. You know, being in different environments, finding the right food that, you know, you feel comfortable eating and that you can go on stage and you feel like your body's fueled. It was just a lot to take on, I think, in that aspect of things.
Finding a
is lot.
laundromat on tour can be tough.
Finding a laundromat, adjusting to like to sleeping and,
Yeah.
you know, in different time zones, all of it was, that part was a bit overwhelming.
So while ABT has had Black dancers in the company over the course of its 80 plus years, when you arrived, there still weren't a lot of them. Did you feel a difference? Did you feel an otherness when you joined the company? And did you appreciate that the BIPOC community was so incredibly underrepresented in the dance world when you were a younger dancer?
No, it was not something that I was fully aware of. I was fortunate enough that in the small school that I trained in San Pedro, California, that my teacher kind of shielded me from a lot of that. I most likely was the only Black girl in my class, but it wasn't something that we talked about. I never felt singled out in a negative way. If things were going on behind the scenes, Cynthia Bradley, my teacher, never brought it to my attention. Like, I know that there were students that left the school when I joined. I know that there were you know, funders that, you know, pulled out because I was getting lead roles because she felt I should be doing them.
You were doing the best one there.
Right. So, but that was all kept from me, and I think that it allowed me to just focus on my training, focus on being the best dancer I could be, which prepared me in a way for coming into ABT, where I felt like I'm just like everyone else. Right. I'm a dancer. But I would say a couple of years in, I started to feel more isolated. I think it was a combination of being a young adult and coming into my own and trying to understand who I wanted to be, the artist I wanted to be. And I think a lot of young people in those years, they want to connect with people and find commonalities, and I didn't have that in the company. I was the only Black woman for 10 years, the first 10 years of my career. So I developed these relationships with the Black men in the company, and there were, you know, a handful of them that there's a lot of turnaround, they'd come and go, but there were a consistent group of Black men that I connected with and could share similar experiences. You know, but I must say that at ABT, there weren't a ton of outwardly racist things that happened. I think there were things that people were unaware of, and I had these conversations with them that I think were impactful for both me and them. And I had very honest conversations with the artistic director, with Kevin McKenzie as well, that allowed, I think, for ABT and me to grow.
So you have been fortunate throughout your life that you've had a lot of remarkable women as your support systems, and I think of your manager, Gilda Squire, here's today, and Susan Fales Hill, and many, many others. But there was one whom you bonded with and mentored you in a truly extraordinary way, and that's Raven Wilkinson. And that journey with your relationship with her is why we're here today. And so congratulations on your new book, The Wind at My Back.
Thank you.
It is a remarkable tribute to Raven and your incredible relationship with her. So what precipitated your writing this book now?
It's been a long time coming of figuring out how I wanted to tell Raven's story. I think that with her passing a couple of years ago, it definitely was like the catalyst. Maybe about a year before she passed, that I started to feel this kind of like urgency where so many Black iconic, dancers in the ballet world in particular were getting older. Arthur Mitchell had passed. Raven wasn't doing well. Frances Taylor Davis, who a lot of people don't really know her background in classical ballet, but people know her as why am I blanking on his name? The jazz musician Miles Davis as one of his wives. But before she was Miles Davis' wife, she was a ballerina, and she actually performed at the Paris Opera, and I believe was the first Black woman to do that. So she passed away a couple of months after Arthur Mitchell, and then Raven eventually did, I think, the following year. And it was feeling this sense of urgency that I needed to share their stories with the world. And I feel like being in this position with this platform, that it's my responsibility. Writing my book, Black Ballerinas, was kind of the first step to doing that, and I wanted to be able to feature different ballerinas who had had an impact on my life. But Raven, her impact was something very different. When I found out about her, that she existed, it was watching the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo documentary, which I believe ABT, they gave the dancers, I remember there being like a box or something sitting.
We shared because Freddie Franklin, who was one of the ballet master teachers, gurus,
at ABT.
Was highlighted, and it was an incredible documentary. So stepping back with Raven, so she was the first Black ballerina at the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, and clearly this extraordinary artist who endured just some really awful stuff over the years. But she was able to build this extraordinary career while living her core values of graciousness and integrity and a commitment to the art form. And so I thought it would be good for you to help us understand, give a quick journey, Raven's journey to ballet, and how did she find ballet?
Well, she saw the Ballet Russe, and she actually saw Freddie Franklin perform. That was the very first ballet that she saw at City Center in New York City, and she immediately fell in love with it. And Ballet Russe became the goal for her, similarly to how ABT became, seeing them perform live for the first time and just falling in love with the music and the movement. And she had very supportive parents. Her father was a doctor, and intellectuals, Black intellectuals living in Harlem, and I think I wanted to show this light in a way that I think people don't often think of Black people in that time, in the 30s and in the 40s. Living the life that she was living as a young person, and being exposed to the arts in New York City with this really full and rich experience of what art was, which I think impacted her so much and made her into the person that she was. But it took several times auditioning for the Ballet Russe before she was invited, and I know Freddie Franklin had a big role in that.
Well, many people may not know what the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo is, and it's a storied company and was a really big deal in its
Yes.
day.
Yes.
And they toured a lot, especially after World War II. And it's the home of, dancers like Danilova and Chalchief and Alicia Alonso and Irina Baranova and Freddie Franklin, of course, and Sid Charisse. Leonid Messine was its first resident choreographer, and they did rep ranging from Fokine to Ashton to DeMille to Balanchine. They were the thing to be part of, right, at that time. So after she joined the Ballet Russe, she quickly rose to soloist because her talent was self-evident, and they toured extensively. But especially when they toured the South, she endured incredibly racist, horrible behavior towards her, and incredibly distressing. And so do you want to share some of the things that she shared with you about her time touring?
Yeah, she didn't often share the difficult stories. She would here and there. I mean, I feel like I learned most of it from watching maybe interviews I saw, her reading interviews that she had done, or with the Ballet Russe documentary. But the worst experiences she had were in Montgomery, Alabama, when they were touring, and the KKK were thriving in that time. And there were just several occasions when, they would be waiting at the stage door, threatening her life. There were times when they'd stop the tour bus on the road. They'd force themselves, onto the tour bus and asking where the Black person was, not using those nice words.
Right.
And the company was very protective over Raven, and the dancers often would hide her, and she was staying in the white hotels a lot of the time because she was so fair-skinned that they didn't notice. But over time, they would, seek her out, and it just became too much, where her life was being threatened, and she no longer could tour through the South, and they just felt that it was too risky for everyone. And then she eventually left the company and moved to Amsterdam, where she finished out her professional ballet career.
I thought it was really a testament to her integrity that when somebody questioned her, she was never going to deny who she was.
Right.
When your life is threatened, I think maybe not being so candid with
Right.
a viable option.
Right.
But she had huge personal integrity.
Yes, she did, and I think that's something that was ingrained in her, like the way that her parents raised her, that she was never going to deny the fact that she was African American. But she always answered, like you said, with integrity, but she always, whenever she was asked what nationality she was, she would always say, I'm American. I'm an American. That's who I am. I'm an American just like you. And I learned so much from her by the way that she handled herself and the way she found love and humor in so many situations. I mean, there's a story in there, in the book, that she has shared with me many times about going to the cafe. I think it was in the hotel in Montgomery, Alabama, I believe it was still, and she saw these families, and she just thought, oh, this is such a beautiful environment, seeing fathers and mothers with their kids having lunch, and I think she went to put her coat down and saw a table full of white hoods and realized she was surrounded by all of the Klansmen with their family having lunch. But she found this humor in it, like, they're human beings just like me, and they have these relationships with their families, and just trying to understand where that separation comes in, where they can treat other human beings the way they, treated her and so many others.
So she went to Amsterdam and danced with Dutch National Ballet, and then she came back to the States and she started working with New York City Opera. And she had a long career wearing various hats in that, and then retired when the company, City Opera, sort of closed its doors. So when you were a young dancer, were you aware of this rich history of Black women dancing?
No, I was not aware, and I feel like it's, I have these conversations with my colleagues that, there are so many Black dancers that have been played a big part and had a huge impact on the classical ballet community and world that we just don't know about, because you can't open up a ballet book and learn about their history. So Black dancers, classical dancers, were not on my radar, and I wouldn't learn about Raven until I was in my mid-20s.
Wow. So you start the book with a beautiful story about your meeting her for the first time. Do you want to share that?
Yes. So the very first time I saw her was in the documentary, and I figured she wasn't alive. I figured she was older, and I hadn't really heard anything about her outside of that documentary. But I started sharing her story in interviews. Whenever I was being interviewed, I would talk about Raven Wilkinson and how inspired I was by her story. And my manager, Gilda, heard me, and so she decided on her own to do some research, and she found out that Raven was alive. She lived a block away from me on the Upper West Side. Decided to reach out to her and ask if she would be interested in a conversation between me and her, two different generations of Black ballerinas. So that was set up at the Studio Museum in Harlem. We had not yet met, though, before I would do that talk with her. So the book opens with me in a rehearsal with Alexei Ratmansky, and looking at the clock, just thinking, I have to make it uptown to Harlem. The evening begins at 7:30. My rehearsal didn't end until 7 in downtown Manhattan. Running, sweating, doing my makeup in the cab, just so anxious and nervous to meet my ultimate idol. And when I see her, she's as small as I am, and her heart just filled the room, and she just embraced me. And it was just the beginning of an incredible relationship.
You say in the book that she was an icon who made my dreams seem less impossible. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, there was something about Raven that allowed me to see beyond what was possible on the stage for me. I think before learning of her story, I had goals. I would love to be a soloist. One day it would be incredible if I ever had the opportunity of even learning a principal role in a classical work, let alone being promoted to principal. But when I saw her story, I recognized the impact that she had on me. That made me feel that my responsibility was so much bigger. Every time I stepped onto the stage, the one person in the audience it could impact by seeing representation, and it just changed my outlook on life and on my career. And that's when it was still early on that I was working with my manager Gilda, but she definitely impacted the things that I was doing. It wasn't, again, just about working towards this goal of principal dancer, but spreading sharing my story and the stories of so many other Black dancers in the ballet world, and setting an example.
It strikes me that she was a woman who put the art form first.
Yes.
And wanting to push the art form was part of that. So where were you in your career, with ABT when you met her?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because it's very important. I was already a soloist in the company, but kind of I felt a little bit like at a standstill. I don't think I didn't have a lot of guidance internally within ABT in knowing, what those next steps were, and really understanding what I needed to do to get there. I felt a little bit, isolated again, being in that position, and Raven just gave me this renewed sense of spirit of understanding that my journey has never been like in the person next to me, starting at 13, coming into the company after only 4 years of training. Just everything about my path hadn't been like what I'd heard of. So why should I be trying to walk in someone else's path now at this point, being a soloist? I felt like it's okay that it's taken me longer, and I'm going to continue to keep striving. It's not about how quickly I get there. It's about enjoying the journey. It's about the experiences I'm having in the studio, working with incredible choreographers and being present and enjoying all of those moments. And it allowed for me to be present and grow as an artist, which allowed me then to get more opportunities within the company.
So it seems that Raven helped you also find your voice and confidence to speak up. And you know, the culture of ballet, especially for the women, it's about silence and obedience. And so not encouraging you to ask for what you want,
Right.
what you need.
Right.
And so she encouraged you to just have a conversation with Kevin McKenzie, the artistic director, about Sleeping Beauty.
Yes.
You want to share that?
Yes, I mean, there were several occasions, and it, you know, I look at her story, at Raven's story, and the experience she had at the Ballerinas, and being able to have, you know, mature conversations, especially I think for her age at the time, with the artistic director, and stand up for herself, and she definitely, I feel like, imparted that on me, that there are ways that you can do it where it's not aggressive, it's within the bounds of, you know, what you should be able to ask for because of your talent, to have some agency over your own career. And I remember, and it, like you were saying, it's really ingrained in the culture that we should kind of sit back, and if you're talented enough, it will come. That mentality. And I remember I was a soloist, and the casting went up for Sleeping Beauty, and I was not cast as Princess Florine, the Bluebird Padada, which it's principal dancers who did the role, but most of the soloists were also performing the role, and I just couldn't understand why I wasn't cast for it. And I typically would just internalize it and say, well, you're not good enough, or there's some other reason that you're not being cast, but I wouldn't say anything. You just kind of hold this resentment inside in the studio.
Right.
And you know, I had these conversations with Raven thinking like, well, maybe it's this reason that I didn't and this. And she's like, why don't you ask?
Right.
Why don't you have a mature conversation with Kevin and, you know, show that you want to do this, and what do you need to do in order to be prepared if he doesn't think you are. Yeah. So I did. I walked into his office and I sat down, and he didn't even realize I wasn't cast to do it, which I feel like when you're in a company of that, you know, ABT's size, that, you know, you often are overlooked, you know.
Yeah, 90 dancers, yeah.
With 90 dancers, yeah. And he said, well, why don't we find a date for you to perform it? And I was like, is that all it takes all this time? I could have been having these really mature conversations. And it was like such a big win for Raven and I together.
So then comes Firebird,
Yes.
which is a big moment.
Yes.
And so this ballet was, you know, being choreographed by Alexei Ramonsky, who's arguably one of the, you know, biggest names in the world in terms of ballet choreography. And I want to say, he once said to me that you were one of the most musical dancers he ever worked with.
Oh, wow.
So,
Wow.
and he knows from musical, right? So anyway, this big new production of Firebird. So how did you find out about it? And, you know, how did it all roll out?
I actually, the very first time I learned that I would be learning the role, which since I joined the company, I've been learning principal roles, whether it be in contemporary works, mostly contemporary works, but it didn't mean you were going to ever perform. It didn't mean you'd actually be cast in them just because you were learning the part. But the opportunity to be in a studio and learning a work and when it's being created is just thrilling to me. So I learned, I think we were in Japan on tour, and I was told that I would be learning the role, and it was so exciting. But when I was actually cast and the dates went up for my first performances, which were at the Segerstrom Center here in Orange County.
Well.
Yeah. I happened to be in the Dance Studio of Harlem building. I was rehearsing with some black dancers when they were starting to form the company again for Dance Theater of Harlem, and we were helping to create some choreography and works that the company would eventually do. So I was surrounded by black dancers in this historically black building that Arthur Mitchell built. And I looked on my phone on my lunch break, and a tweet, a tweet that came out that had the actual casting, and I was like, it's official. I'm actually going to perform the lead in a classical work for ABT. And it was just such a...
Not just the lead, you got opening night cast.
Right. It was
Which is a big deal.
It was a really big deal, and to be surrounded by my peers and dancers who understood, I mean, in their bones, what it meant for a black dancer to get that opportunity in a majority white company.
So I thought it would be appropriate to take a moment. There's another great black ballerina who also created a renowned version of Firebird, who recently passed away.
Yes.
Stephanie Dabney, and she was, the iconic Firebird for Dance Theater of Harlem, and she just passed in September.
Right.
Did you ever see tapes of her dancing?
Yes.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Oh, good.
She was a big part of my preparation in the Firebird for Alexi's version of it, and I just remember the posters, these iconic images of Stephanie, in the Sisson, with her back like an attitude, and just reading articles, even like old articles, and watching YouTube clips, to be able to see the strength and fire that she came with it. Just, I wanted to collect all of these different interpretations to be able to find what I wanted to do. But Stephanie was also very supportive of me, and, she was there at my first Swan Lake performance in New York City, and it was just an incredible moment to be able to come together. Even though it wasn't the Firebird, she saw me do another bird.
Yeah. No, that's, and we wish her family, So after your debut of Firebird, which was an enormous success, 2 days later, you had to reckon with career-threatening injuries.
Yeah.
And so you withdrew from the season and had to find a doctor who could paste you back together, right?
Yes, yeah. It was such an interesting season for me. It was huge in terms of, I think I'd been in the company for about 12 years, and this was the biggest season I had yet. I was doing Gamzadi and La Bayadere. I think I did Coppelia that year, the lead, Swanilda, and the Firebird, and it was really strenuous on my body, and I wasn't resting and getting the proper treatment that I needed to leading up to that season. But I knew in the back of my mind, and I say this to young dancers all the time, like, yes, this story is so heroic and all these things, but don't do this. I knew that if I would have gone into PT or gone to Kevin and said, I'm feeling a lot of pain, that I would have been taken out of a lot of the rehearsals, told to rest, and there's no way I would have been prepared to go on stage and perform. I would have never had the opportunity, and I would never be a principal dancer. That's really how I see it. And so I pushed through. I was getting, once it got to a really, I was in so much pain that I could barely stand. Like I was seeing someone outside of the company, and we were working on my body every evening. But it got to a point where he was like, I can no longer help you. You have to go see a doctor. And so it was 2 days after that I pulled out of the season that I found a doctor, Dr. Martin O'Malley, who works with professional athletes, basketball players, football players who had similar injuries to me.
So you had multiple stress fractures.
I had 6 stress fractures in my tibia. 3 of them were dreaded black line fractures, which are almost full breaks through the bone. So I ended up having surgery. I had a plate screwed into my tibia. which I still have in there. I recently had one of the screws removed because I still have a lot of pain. It's just not the same body, pre-surgery. But I was back on stage in 8 months.
Which is amazing. In the book, you mentioned that Raven saw a linkage between the bird-like qualities in Firebird and Swan Lake. And so how did you find out about performing Swan Lake, and what did that mean to you, in that in the ballet canon, Swan Lake is very different than Coppelia or Firebird or Nutcracker. So it was an enormous big deal on a different scale.
Yes. It felt like an outer body experience when Kevin, initially he said to me, I want to prepare you in case we have any injuries. We often, there's just like never enough time in these companies, and they end up going to guest artists to come and fill in positions if principal dancers get injured, rather than preparing the dancers internally in the company to be able to step up. And so Kevin said, this is something that we've needed to do, and I want to prepare you in case something happens. So that was, I could not believe that this was happening, and not just happening and as a dancer in the company or as a Black woman, but I was 32 years old, which is very old in the ballet world, to be getting the first opportunity to do a role like that.
Right.
And I ended up doing a kids show, ABT Kids, and early in the mornings, you get up, and the Metropolitan Opera House is full of, ages like 4 to 8 or something like that. And so my first experience was doing just a small portion of the opening scene in the second act, the mime sequence. And there's
You're a white swan.
I was a white swan in that, and there's a funny story that goes along with that. But it's a little girl sitting next to my then boyfriend, who's my husband now. My husband came. He left. He's an attorney. He left work early so he could come see me do this 5-minute portion of White Swan on the Met stage at 10 a.m. or something. And the whole time I was up there, this little girl was screaming, "Where's the swan? Where's this?" She thought a real swan was going to be out there, and I was very disappointing to her. I really let her down. But that prepared me in a way for what was to come, with
Crazy.
the actual performance. So I found out that I would be cast to perform for the first time in Australia, in Brisbane, and that was where I made my debut as Swan Queen.
It's actually probably helpful to be able to do an out-of-town tryout as opposed to having like the first thing in New York.
Oh, yes.
So there was such huge pressure around you with this performance, and it's not only the technical and artistic pressures of an incredibly challenging role, because this is a role where you have to be very different people over the course of 3 hours, and the style of the dancing is very different. So it draws on lots of, and then you have this other layer of being the first Black ballerina to do it at American Ballet Theatre. And I wondered did you try to just not hear what, and just focus, or how did you manage through all that?
I tried my best to block out all the noise and just focus, and I really was able to do that when I was in Australia. The environment was just so welcoming. The people are so friendly and so nice, and I knew that they were just so excited to have ABT there. And it's like you were saying, so it was really a great place to have my first performance, and I felt this was probably the most prepared I really have ever felt for a role at ABT.
That's saying something.
It is. I mean, Kevin started preparing me really early, not knowing that we were gonna have this opportunity in Australia. So I had to just step back and let go and say, as dancers, we rehearse and we prepare so that we can go on stage and not think about the technical stuff, as intensely. So but there's a story in the book where I speak about the first tech rehearsal that I did in Australia, and how it was this outer body experience of letting the pressures in my mind that I feel like I was really creating of what I thought people might be thinking, or kind of preparing myself for what may be said after a performance. And that tech rehearsal was a disaster, but a lot of just the ideas of what Raven had prepared me for, I feel like in so many ways, to take on a role like this, getting centered and just hearing those words that she said to me over and over again before every performance, let me be the wind at your back, and feeling that she was there with me, all of the Black dancers who deserved to have an opportunity like I was getting, that never was given an opportunity, that I was doing it for all of them. And it was such an incredible experience, that first performance in Australia.
Well, I certainly remember that performance and the first performance at the Met, which was also an incredible deal on so many levels. But it was also, as somebody who, runs cultural institutions, what was so incredible to me is that the audience was very different. And it really sort of brought home the notion that representation really, really matters, right?
Yeah.
And so you saw folks who'd never been to the Metropolitan Opera House before cheering you on, which was, I think, a really important moment for the ballet world in the United States. So on June 30th, 2015, you're sitting in the studio after class, and Kevin walks in, and
that was, an incredible day. Going back again to that sense of community and family that I've felt in the ballet world, but especially at ABT since I joined, made that moment of my promotion that much more special. To have him kind of lead up to eventually Stella Abrera's promotion was the last one that he announced. To be in the room and having all of my colleagues, just seeing different promotions happen that were so deserving and long, awaited, and then he, turned to me and he said, "Misty, take a bow," was just, to be embraced by all of us who have been on this journey together and seen each other's work ethic and seen our ups and downs, was just such a prideful moment for me, and I think for my friends, and then to see Stella Abrera as a Filipino woman to become the first principal ballerina from her community. It was just an overwhelming day for both of us.
Kevin used to, when we would talk about what his thoughts were around promotions, and he really felt that going from soloist to principal is not simply just a dancer is now technically able or artistically able to do these lead roles, but he needed to see leadership in those dancers. And so he clearly had seen your development and your leadership skills coming to the fore. And so I think that that's also a beautiful testament to how much he believed in you. So I know we're sort of getting low on time, but I did want to say, there are some people who will say, and I certainly heard it when I was at ABT, why ballet? It's this, white, European, patriarchal art form, isn't it yesterday's news? Why are you focusing on it? So what is it about ballet that you think is timeless and can move us forward?
I love this question, and I'm not often asked it, so thank you. There is something that is so genius about the classical ballet technique that doesn't, it's not what carries all of the racism and this kind of negativity that's often connected to classical dance. The ballet technique is so pure, and it's not had to change in all of these years because it was so brilliantly formed, and it goes beyond just learning steps. it has given me a self-confidence, a pride, a sense of empowerment and beauty, a connection to myself, all of these tools to be a better human being, to be a better member of my community and society. It goes so much farther than seeing it as this European white elitist art form. I think that everyone can connect with it if really given an opportunity, without all of that noise.
It's an incredible vocabulary.
Yes, yes.
And the skills that you learn becoming a dancer, whether you go professional or not,
Right.
are transferable in so many different
Exactly.
ways. So, so on December 17th, 2018, we lost Raven, the world lost Raven. And I know that that was incredibly difficult for you. How did you cope?
I had amazing support. You know, Kevin was there for me. But the best way for me to cope was to go on stage and perform, which I was fortunate that we were in the middle of our Nutcracker season
Right.
at the Segerstrom Center when that happened. And I went on stage and performed one of my favorite roles in Alexei Ratmansky's Nutcracker as Clara.
Yeah.
And I think that performing and doing something that she loved was just so healing in really coping with the loss of her, but also just connecting with other dancers in the Black community and kind of sharing in our passion and love of her, and meeting new people that I didn't know she had relationships with, you know, having a memorial service for her, which Gilda and I put together in New York City, in Harlem, where she grew up. To see this eclectic group of people come together who knew Raven throughout her life was unbelievable. I mean, the fact that she, you know, lived in a convent and, you know, was a nun at one point and just lived all over the world and collected this amazing group of people. It just said so much about her.
Well, she touched a lot of lives, and there is a quote in the book that I love, and it's, and her words will live on within me every day, and her spirit will dance with me on every stage. And it's really, really beautiful.
Thank you.
So you have, you know, fast forward a little bit, a lot has happened in the world, and the ballet world has come to some reckonings. You have started a foundation.
Yes.
And with the Be Bold program. Do you want to give us a little description of what you're
Yes.
doing?
Yeah. It's really exciting to be able to kind of have the opportunity to bring all of my experiences together and give back to the Black and brown community, the ballet community in the ways that I am. So with the Misty Copeland Foundation, our first program is Be Bold, and it stands for Ballet Explorations. Ballet offers leadership development. Which I truly believe it does.
That's great.
And so, you know, really following similarly to how I started dance, we're implementing this free after-school ballet class twice a week at community centers. So we're starting out at 5 Boys and Girls Clubs in the Bronx. You know,
Nice.
going for communities who might not have the access. And maybe familiarity, introducing the ballet technique to their community and their families. And, you know, we've created our own curriculum. I came together with the National Dance Institute, Jacques D'Amboise, that he
Who is
founded.
a Pied Piper of dance himself.
Yes. And we came up with this beautiful ballet curriculum that really is a bit different from how you think about classical ballet, you know, allowing for these children to have a little more of a voice and agency over what they're doing. They're contributing in terms of creative movement within the bounds of the technique. There's live music in every class,
Oh, that's really great.
which I think is really important for a child to experience, but it's ages 8 to 10, and it's just really exciting to be able to give back to these communities in a way that has helped me and formed who I am in such an incredible way.
So the goal isn't about training the next Misty.
Right.
It's really about how this can make somebody's life more full.
Yes.
And, you know, I'm a big believer that the arts make people's lives better. And so this is an incredible avenue. Do you see some of this work being traced from your Raven's legacy?
I do, and I think about her so often in all the work that I'm doing, and what, I mean, just if she were, I mean, she is here with us, but if she were physically here with us, how much she would understand, and even thinking about her own childhood and how she started with this kind of creative movement, and just the impact that dance and music had on her life, and as a young Black girl, and in that time, that it still made such a huge impact on her, that it can do that for our community. So she's always in my heart and in my thoughts when I'm developing and creating things.
Well, her touch, you know, ripples on and on
Yes.
and on and on. So I don't know if we have...
Yes.
We have time for questions?
We do have a few questions. Here's the first one. Misty, I saw you a few years ago when you were at Live Talks Los Angeles. I was one of the dancers who had my ballet shoes that you signed. Here's my question. I've loved ballet and wanted to be a professional ballerina, but injuries have plagued me, and I just don't think that dream is going to happen. Ballet has been the world for me, and of course, I knew this may be the outcome. Any advice on moving forward?
I think that there are so many possibilities out there in the dance world. I don't think it's as black and white as, you know, I think a lot of dancers, young dancers especially, set their goals, like I did, on one company, and you think that's the end-all be-all, but there are so many opportunities out there. There are so many companies. There are so many opportunities to be a part of dance that may not be on the stage, that may be in you know, an artistic capacity, but that's in development, or it's teaching, or it's behind the scenes in education. But I think it's important to keep your mind open and know that you can still be a part of this incredible world.
Next question. Role models are instrumental in the early lives of children and young men and women. Please tell us how you feel about being a role model today.
It's an amazing honor. It's something that I feel, you know, like we were saying earlier, I feel that it's my responsibility, especially as a young Black woman, to be in this position and to be seen. I know that it's important for me to set an example. So I've never seen it as, you know, too much pressure or a burden, but it's just, it's a beautiful privilege.
What should I look for in seeking a mentor?
That's a great question. I think for some, like, qualities that you would like to possess, qualities that you would like to have, someone that you have respect for, someone that you can learn things from, things that you may not know, someone, I guess, maybe you can see yourself in as well.
All right, that brings us to the end of a lovely conversation. Thank you, Rachel, for being part of this. Thank you,
so
Misty,
much.
for coming back to Live Talks Los Angeles.
You.